we go.
Here we go.
This is it.
This is it. Here we go.
The final cut.
The final cut. Wow.
Putting it all on the table here. This is, episode 9.
I can't believe we're here.
Come down to this.
Yeah. I think we're going to pull it out here at the end. Planes kind of going down. You're like pulling back right at the last minute.
I don't think so. I think I know how this movie ends.
I promise you, it's not some woman floating on a door with you hanging on
the door. And he's goes down to the.
It's like, oh my gosh, wow.
Well, here we are. So episode 9, the final cut. For those, I don't know why you would be watching episode 9 and not 1 through 8, but maybe you have not seen the first 8 episodes, the first 15 hours of material.
Right. But when you see the official documentary on Amazon, it'll all make sense, and then it'll probably be in theaters all over the country.
Exactly. Yes.
But it could happen.
We've been following a 20-year arc of Microsoft's mobile platform, from Windows CE to Pocket PC to Windows Mobile to Zune and Kin and Windows Phone 7, Windows Phone 8, Windows Phone, now Phone 10, including Lumia and all that. And here we are. So big long journey, interviewed probably 20 people, lots of execs. Today we are interviewing Laura Butler, who is a very famous Microsoft engineer, was there in the very beginning of Windows, had a very storied career at Microsoft, actually joined the Windows Phone team toward the end of her tenure. Had a chance to work with her, and she was awesome. And so we thought, good person to provide context on closing this chapter of Windows Phone and this whole mobile platform thing. So one thing we're not going to talk about today is, after Windows Phone, Microsoft made a couple of Surface phones. Remember those foldable Surface phones with Android in them? Yeah. It doesn't count. That doesn't count. It's not part of the canon. Not part of the canon.
It's not part of the canon. And, it's running Android and kind of like a Google thing. It just kind of gets discontinued after you bet on it,
Well, it's funny just to spend 2 seconds talking about that project. Originally it was a version of Windows running on that thing.
Right.
Remember they were doing dual screen Windows? I forget what that was called. Some code name. Maybe Andromeda, I think it was called.
Okay.
And then, you don't have to, you can imagine the complexities of writing dual screen Windows and apps and all that stuff.
But you know what? If Jay Allard had still been at the company, he would have figured it out.
Well, yeah, we would have had Courier by then.
We would have had Courier. And if you had struggled with software development, put Dave Cutler on the project.
There you go.
You're golden.
We do what gets done.
There you go.
So, but they did that. And then what they did was they punted and just said, well, let's just put Android on it. And, and then they shipped it. This is in the midst of like every new phone coming out was a 5G phone. And so they shipped it without 5G. And they also had this kind of mediocre camera. So it was a premium device with a mediocre camera and no 5G. And surprise.
It feels, it's like a recipe for something. I'm trying to put my, I'm trying to place my finger on it. Disaster. That's it. It's that kind of recipe. Yeah. Wow. Anthony Bourdain would never have a recipe like that.
Even there. So that's why it's not part of the canon, because it's just so outside of the whole.
Absolutely.
I don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah. I love the notion of whenever you decide to punt, that's when you go with Android.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, F it. Put Android on it.
We tried really hard to build our own thing that we just don't have the talent. So let's just throw Android on it. It's free. We just downloaded the bits. No problem. Yeah. The
other thing I wanted to get out of the way is people have been asking, where's Terry Myerson? And, Terry has his own career now and he's doing very well. And, all my blessings to all of his success, but he isn't on the show. But we did unearth a video that I wanted to show.
Excellent.
That I think is worth showing, and showing sort of the origin story of Windows Phone with Terry in it. And we won't watch the whole thing, thankfully. I will not torture you.
But you might see familiar faces in the video.
You might see some familiar faces. So
I did. I was like, awesome.
There you go. Terry doesn't actually look like this anymore.
It's been a crazy 18 months since that phone call. Steve Ballmer.
Like a
This is Terry.
phone.
You're not serious, are you? Well, I appreciate the call, and it's very nice of you to say, but Steve, this is nuts. Okay, then. I'll see you there. What did I just get myself into?
Hey.
Typical Microsoft Office for those that are not familiar.
And the blue shirt that you wear when you're in a conference.
Hey, Terry, I hear you're joining the Windows Phone business. Oh!
And you know what? Nothing would make me happier than having my best end user guy and IT guy to come with me. In 10 days, we have one of our biggest customers coming in, and I need to be ready. And what I'm reading here is that this IT department is saying that their end users don't like our phones.
What?
Really? I mean, these are the best solutions for email and calendar. People love our phones.
What? That is so old school. People have moved on. They want photos. They want games.
I'm not going to play the rest of it. It goes on and on. But suffice to say, they come up with this idea of Windows Phone. You can see this here. And then, here, hold on for a sec. We'll play the ending.
Wish me luck in this meeting. I'm Terry, leader of the new Windows Phone group.
That's pretty good stuff. Yeah. So how'd it go?
You know, I think it went pretty well. They love all the end user goodness and really appreciated the roadmap and our management capabilities. But with them liking both sides of the coin, I'm not sure who won the bet.
I really hope we look as good in pink as Terry does.
Well, we're going to find out.
There you go.
There we go. You're going to find out.
All right.
So Terry Meyerson, he came from Exchange server.
Yes.
You know, which is a totally different world. Enterprise, email, calendar. You know, you're probably not thinking as much about that end user experience on Exchange server, maybe.
Right.
You might have to interact with the Outlook people, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's good that he brought his best IT guy and his end user experience guy.
Right. Very similar as to when they developed the iPhone. Probably a very similar situation.
It was just exactly like that. Yeah, we grabbed some guys from the defunct Apple Mac server group.
That's right. And the Lisa group.
The Lisa group. Ouch.
The Newton group. But yeah, anyway, so we couldn't get Terry on the show, so that's as close as we're gonna get to getting Terry on the show. So
yeah.
You know,
last time I saw Terry was at Madrona.
Yeah. Well, he's doing really well now with the Truveta stuff. So
absolutely. It's good stuff.
Cool.
That's cool.
So let's get started like officially now. Now we'll
officially, we're really starting now. All right. Okay. I'm in.
Maybe we should head over and get some gear. Let's get straight with the gear, the kind of the end game of gear. So this is the 2016, 2015, 2017 ish gear. Windows Phone 10.
This is like Avengers Endgame. Kind of.
Yes.
Are we going to take out Thanos?
Who knows? We'll see.
All right.
But we'll head over to the UK one more time.
I hope they have some good gear over there.
All right. We're back in the UK with Ben and Matt and Rob and I here in the United States of America. And we're going to talk about episode 9, the final chapter, and all of the devices involved in the final chapter. And I guess, ironically, not as many devices involved in the final chapter, not too surprisingly, but we're going to talk a little bit about where the Nokia Lumia Microsoft thing ended up. And then we're going to talk about sort of the iconic last phone, So maybe Ben and Matt, let me send it over to you. And this is our off to the museum segment one more time. Here we go.
So last time you may recall that we talked about, the really iconic Lumia devices, 800, 1020, a few others. This time we're kind of reaching the end of the journey. And there's one device that I pulled out, which was a very notable device. It was a kind of a bit of a bizarre product when it came out. And it was this device here, the Nokia 1520. And I don't know whether you can see it in my hand. This was enormous. And just to put some context on it, the first Lumia device was this device here, the Lumia 800. And this was that device. So if you put them together, you can see the footprint. It's absolutely huge, this product.
It is.
It's enormous. And, you know, it came in different color SKUs. So we've got the yellow, we've got the black. And Nokia were always very good with that. But this was a lot. I had this product. I loved this product. I always liked the bigger phones. The real estate was, you know, phenomenal. It is quite interesting because at the time, this looked absolutely enormous. I mean, I can't tell you how crazy it looked.
Like a cartoon phone, you know.
Let's put it next to the latest iPhone. So here we've got the iPhone 15 Pro Max. You know what?
Oh man, it's still bigger.
It's still bigger, but it's only just when you're talking about a world where most people had phones that were considerably smaller. I mean, even this was one of the predecessors, the 820. And you can see how that was a lot smaller.
Yeah.
So
no,
1520 was had Samsung launched its first Note, the first tablet by that time frame, you think?
Yeah, I think the Note would have been out by then, definitely, because the tablet trend was started by them. So that would have come out. I mean, you can go back Toshiba TG01, which was a 4.3-inch display. That at the time was considered massive. So what was notable about this device? Well, what was very important about this device was it was the first Lumia device with 1080p resolution, which of course made a lot of sense given the real estate that you had.
Yeah, you needed that.
Now, was that Microsoft branded or was that still Nokia branded?
This was just Nokia. So this was a Nokia branded device. And in fact, we didn't really get into the Microsoft branding till later. The Lumia 950 was the big one. That was the big bet. Amazing camera, exclusively available with AT&T. And that was the last of the Lumia flagships. I haven't got one of those with me today, but that was one when we're on this journey that we'll talk about. But yeah, this is where, you know, things were starting to go wrong, as you talk about in the episode. It was a bad time.
I was going to say go ahead.
My daughter had that exact device, the yellow one that you had. And, you know, of course, she's complaining that she's using the knockoff versions of Snapchat and the knockoff versions of YouTube and the knockoff versions of.
That was the issue, wasn't it?
Yeah, the lack of apps was getting acute.
The other thing, though, the larger screen was also indicative of a trend that people were trying to think about using their phones as their primary compute device. So screens were getting bigger because they were like, well, I can just use this and not a laptop. And there was kind of a thing there where it was a whole phenomenon of like, okay, the phones are going to take over as the primary compute device, which kind of they are at these days. But that drove a lot of these bigger screen experiments back then.
And that actually, Pete, that's a fantastic segue to where we're probably going to end this show, which is we've been on a hell of a journey. But this was the point where things were getting confused. Microsoft had to make some decisions about what they were going to do, and very much the pivot towards Windows Phone as a business enterprise platform was happening. And they worked with a number of partners. And a partner that I know is very close to your heart, and a device which I know is very, very close to your heart, is this product right here, which is the HP Elite X3, September 2016, and widely considered to be the very last ever Windows Phone device manufactured. And again,
where's the dock?
Okay, well, if I can, I might need two hands for this, but the dock, and I can't tell you how heavy this beautiful piece of engineering is here. But here's the dock. Absolutely astonishing.
It was fantastic.
Look at the extensibility on the back of that.
You do everything with that thing. Well, again, it was designed to be a PC replacement, basically. I mean, that's the whole concept behind the. By the way, there's Bang & Olufsen speakers,
right?
Bang & Olufsen, what speakers?
Yeah. The speakers were branded Bang & Olufsen. They did a deal there. You see the B&O.
You can actually see that. You see that?
Oh yeah. Very cool.
You know.
So just a little bit more about this: a 5.9-inch screen, 16 megapixel camera, speakers tuned by Bang & Olufsen, designed around extensibility using the Microsoft Continuum capability. The desk dock, which we've talked about, and I can't underestimate. This is a beautiful piece of engineering. I'm sure you can tell us something about this, Pete. But this thing is, oh man, what this must have cost. The weight, it's a chrome finish. It's a beautiful device. And I remember seeing this at Mobile World Congress, and everyone was pretty excited, despite the fact that Windows Phone was getting a pretty bad reputation at that point.
No, it was I mean, HP went all in on this, and they had a team down in San Diego that was chartered to do this, and a really talented engineering team. That was kind of, I wouldn't say skunk work project, but they went off to like do this thing, and the idea was like, what if this was your primary enterprise device, and you carried it with you, and you docked it at your desktop, and you had a keyboard connected to it, and it displayed on a big screen display, like a secondary display that was Windows. And that was the continuum function within the platform, which I think Nokia tried to do a couple of things with, but HP sort of took it all the way to 11 and went all in on it. In fact, there's another accessory which you don't have, which I don't have, unfortunately. Maybe someone out there has it, and you'll see it in the YouTube videos that we show in this episode. But there was a clamshell dock, a clamshell thing that would basically be a secondary display. So when you're on the road, you could have your phone here, and then this clamshell would display Windows on it from the phone. And so it was just like, instead of a secondary monitor, it was a clamshell keyboard and display, like in a super thin, like the thinnest laptop you've ever seen in your life. But it wasn't a laptop; it was just a keyboard and a screen, and it was an accessory to this.
They called that the mobile extender, and it was a 12.5-inch screen that you got with the keyboard. So it was a really, really workable device. And the desk dock, I mean, phenomenal. Display port for external monitor support, 2 USB-A,
HDMI.
USB-C, wired Ethernet. It was an unbelievable commitment. And what was amazing is they carried on supporting this. So it was announced in 2016. They supported it until like 2019, right? It went on a long time.
Yeah, and they did some updates. And I mean, they sold it into enterprises, in volume, and it wasn't really designed to be a consumer thing. And HP had tons of, and still do, tons of enterprise channels where they would sell laptops and things. And they said, well, if you're buying these laptops, buy some of these things too, for more of your mobile workers. And it had all the same, one of the benefits of the platform was it had all the same kind of device management and security. And by that time, they had built all that stuff back into Windows Phone. So from an IT perspective, laptops and Windows phones look pretty similar. And by the way, that was Windows Phone 10. So one of the things we'll talk about in the episode is that transition where the leadership of Windows Phone, which was kind of Terry and Henry and Joe and stuff, actually became leadership of Windows inside of Microsoft. And they rebuilt Windows 8 into Windows 10. And at the same time, we had Windows 10 Mobile, right? And HP was one of the flagships for Windows 10 Mobile, which included.
So that's when we rebranded the OS, kind of going back to Windows Mobile again-ish with Windows 10.
Yeah, we added the word mobile because it was Windows 10. And I guess we thought, oh, well, people might be confused that that's desktop Windows 10. So they added the word mobile. I don't know.
I think this this device and that dock, the Chrome and everything, it really kind of bookends the whole journey in some ways to me, especially since it's HP, because I really feel like we really got kickstarted with the Chrome beautiful compact iPad, which really got things exciting, and then we end with this shiny Chrome thing here from HP compact at the end. Who knew?
No, it was amazing. It was a fantastic and like a great team. Shout out to the team. I'm sure they're watching it in their various positions that they're in today, which I still keep track of them on LinkedIn. And it was really cool. And I think, we'll talk to Laura about this in the episode too, is like winding something like this down had, it was a historical and emotional experience for everyone at Microsoft and the teams involved, because, we're coming up on like a 20-year run here on this kind of mobile platform. And HP, they went all in, and which was great to see that. But, inevitably, the platform was shut down. And Satya had to make some hard choices there. And I wouldn't say the rest is history, but here we are. 2024. So
Absolutely.
Pretty crazy stuff.
That is.
And
so,
I love Rob how you tied the beginning to the end. Yeah, that idea of the iPad with that metallic Yeah, that was. It really is
That's
a very astute comment, and it's been a massive pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you both for inviting us to be part of this.
Yeah.
You can see that the history of these phones is very close to our hearts. We've got a lot of work to do in preparing for these podcasts. I've been looking through some of our Lumia devices. We're missing photographs. We're missing text. We got some write-ups we need to do, and this will have helped with that. So, what a great story.
Yeah, no, really appreciate. I think you guys really brought to life the gear. And like I said, one of the cool things about tech history is we were all a part of it from our perspective, either as a consumer or a developer or whatever. We had these phones, we bought these phones, we built these phones, and just kind of see them in the flesh, as it were. It really helps people kind of grok the whole story. So super appreciate that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well,
all right. Well, for the last time, but not forever. We'll see you guys.
Bye, gentlemen.
Okay. Cheers.
Such sadness.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.
There you go. Little tear.
Little tear. Love those guys.
Yeah.
And they're doing a great service by having that museum and maintaining all this history.
Amazing. You said they got like thousands and thousands of phones. Each one, documented the story and the history and all that stuff. And of course, not just Windows phones, but Nokia phones and all kinds of Symbian phones and Android phones. And so if people have their drawer of phones or box of phones, contact those guys and send them your stuff. Don't just
a lot of younger people would be surprised about how far back the smartphone industry and that revolution goes. If I had $1 every time I see someone on stage talking about the beginning of the smartphone age in 2008 or something like that, or when I remember trading emails with someone and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you were in mobile back in 2010. You were early." And I'm like, "That's late."
Yeah.
And so too many people think it all began with the iPhone and they don't realize there's so much history,
That's true. That's true.
And a bunch of guys in Canada building a BlackBerry. That was a smartphone.
Yep. Don't forget the Blackberries.
Yep.
I almost took a job once with SkyTel. I remember I was working as a BIOS engineer. A friend of mine left to go to SkyTel. Yeah. And for whatever reason, I didn't go. I don't know. They weren't offering me much money. It was in Silicon Valley, and I was greedy, but I just stayed where I was, made a bunch of money. But SkyTel, I remember that
those early Blackberries looked like a SkyTel two-way pager.
Kind of, yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
One of the things we mentioned in that segment was, and maybe people don't fully understand the backstory, is that transition from Windows Phone. So Terry and Joe and Henry and these leaders took over the Windows Phone org from Windows Mobile folks. So if you remember our earlier episodes, right? And kind of rebooted the platform and blah, blah, blah. And we had Joe B on there and the Thriller dance and the whole thing. Okay. Did that for a couple of years. I don't know, a few years. Meanwhile, Big Windows was over here, Sinofsky. Remember Windows? We had Windows 7, which was a big comeback from Vista. Then we had Windows 8, which was a big flop. Remember that? The big time they tried to do a tablet thing. Where's my start button? It's like disaster.
Yeah.
So
Frankenstein.
So that was
kind of go from the touch tile thing to this not really good looking taskbar thing to run the old apps.
Awful. And if you mess up Windows, I mean, you're playing with fire. You're gone.
I mean,
so they got rid of Steve, and like everyone else who could fog a mirror in Windows was gone. And then they brought in Terry and his team and said, okay, now you're in charge of Windows, like actual
big
Windows, not just Windows Phone. Yeah, big Windows.
Previously, the franchise for the whole company.
At that point, I mean, Azure was starting to pick up some steam, and Office obviously was there, but Windows is still the cash cow, the high margin cow. And that was huge. I mean, organizationally, that was tectonic movement. And so Terry and his team and everyone, and I was there as well, we all sort of rebuilt Windows for something called Windows 10. So we skipped the 9. There's a backstory
to that, isn't there?
I think so. I think
something related to like Windows 95, 98, 9X. Like there could be a bug or something weird thing could happen.
Is that why they skipped 9? I don't know.
Well, aside from it, some other people thought it was bad luck, or we only did well on, I don't know. I'm not going to say even or odd or whatever, because, it was a combination, but there was something related to the Windows 9X, stuff from the 90s. And there was some concern. Someone raised some concerns that Windows 9 might blow up or something, kind of like Y2K.
We should ask, Michael Fortin would know that. If you ever remember Michael Fortin, he was running quality for Terry. So
Must
he probably
be it.
knows the backstory.
Probably knows that. Yeah. Yeah. There's so many lessons learned here about climbing up the corporate ladder, and you're excited about getting to the top or getting really close. It's also the place where you're most likely to have your head chopped off.
That's right.
I'm not saying you shouldn't
like
try.
Sticking your head out of the trench.
Stay right under the radar, or right just below that level. Like you mentioned Windows Vista, aka Longhorn, disaster, launch next day. Jim Elchin, goodbye, Jim. As Steve Sinofsky said, Windows 7, this rescue mission, right after the disaster of Vista, as he said it in his words in an interview, we just needed to build a Toyota Camry. Because anybody who remembers the history of Longhorn and everything, it was going to have the kitchen sink.
Oh yeah, it was like a 3-axle Porsche Carrera,
Yes. And so
wings on it.
And so that was a disaster. So get a Toyota Camry out the door. And so Steve Sinofsky goes a hero for doing that. But then he stuck around for Windows 8. Bye-bye.
Right.
Just like Jim Elchin. Launches, yay, next day, gonna go spend time with your family. So That's what happens.
But of course, the context there was, the iPhone had launched, the iPad had launched. The iPad was kind of eating majorly into the Windows market.
Yeah.
A lot of existential dread around iPad and iPhone and all that. And so, but the iPad was being attacked by Sinofsky's Windows org. The iPhone was being attacked by Terry's Windows Phone org.
Yeah.
Probably someone was like, what? This doesn't really make sense. And then there was Windows 8 disaster. So they shuffled everything up. And they said, just have Terry be in charge of Windows and his team, including Windows Phone. And so they built Windows 10, which included Windows 10 Mobile. So they not only came out with a new version of Windows for desktop, but Windows 10 Mobile as well. And, and a big part of Windows 10 was a lot of the telemetry and updating and updatability of Windows 10. And a lot of those components were shared amongst the platforms, the mobile and the desktop platforms.
Because you could see on Windows 10, a lot of the goodness from Windows Phone kind of still was in there.
They pulled in a lot of the telemetry and updatability that was in mobile, into the desktop.
Right.
We used to have these big, I don't know if you ever went to these things. I forgot what they're called, Flight Room or Flight something. But it was like, I don't know how many people in this room, and they'd go through all this telemetry data for the billion people who are using Windows. Like, here's what everyone's using and what's working and not working. And like, literally it was like flight control, like every week they'd figure out like how to do stuff. It's pretty wild stuff. Looking at all that data. Yeah, it was really cool. But Windows 10 Mobile was kind of like, I think if you're trying to get Windows 10, big Windows on track, Windows 10 Mobile kind of maybe didn't get as much attention.
Right.
It was also under such heavy fire from Android and iPhone. The gap was growing and growing. And we'll talk to Laura about this. But
it was a marketing change. They changed the name again from Windows Phone back to Windows Mobile 10.
Windows 10 Mobile
10
from
Mobile.
Windows Phone. That's confusing.
That's kind of like AirPods 2 Pro to Buds, whatever.
AirPod Ear Max.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what do I have? What's happening?
Yeah.
So anyway, it had, as if it needed more challenges. It now had, I would say, management was focused on big Windows and not as much on the mobile part. And so they went through a few things and then finally sort of found a home to say, well, let's see if we can just sell it to businesses.
Yeah. Right.
Hence the HP Elite X3. In fact, why don't we show the HP Elite X3 video? Because it's so cool.
It's very cool.
We just talked about it, the gear thing, but this was so my team helped. We kind of program manage this thing with the HP team in San Diego. Some great folks down there, and yeah, they built this thing. Talk about not a Camry. This was like whatever. This is the Tesla Cybertruck of its day.
Awesome. Awesome.
That's what it was. So let's see what it looks
penultimate.
like. 3-in-1.
3-in-1.
Not 2-in-1.
That fourth coffee.
That's phone, tablet, and PC. They show the laptop dock. This will be the laptop dock closed. There's the dock.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty cool.
That's very cool.
Bring to your desk, snap it in. Now here's the laptop, the lap dock.
Oh, that's awesome.
That was pretty cool. One app, please. But it's an app management. You know, you could have a corporate store basically for apps. But yeah, you're running a secondary Windows screen.
How did this not win?
Pretty awesome.
It is awesome.
I had a high-end Qualcomm in there. Biometrics, fingerprint reader on the back, iris scanner.
Iris scanner, all the way back then. There's Windows Hello. Wow.
Windows 10.
Wow. That looks like you'd reach the mountaintop there.
Did everything.
I think the concept, it's a beautiful device. And
yeah, it was, you know, you saw in the previous segment, it was a pretty hefty device. The dock weighed a ton. It was like with the Bang & Olufsen speakers, the Chrome, and they went all in.
They did. It's awesome.
But, you know, still at that time, you know, it was very much a BYO, you know, bring your own phone to work kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the idea of like your corporate overlords giving you a phone to use, kind of like, you know, some companies still do that, but it's kind of unusual.
Right.
So,
right. Wow.
So the whole channel business model thing was a little bit against the grain, but as just a standalone device in terms of innovation, I mean, it had everything.
Absolutely.
Had everything.
Yeah.
There, so.
It didn't look like it had any equal in its time.
No equals.
Was that, would you say 2016?
Introduced in 2016. I remember actually introducing it with HP in Japan on stage.
Oh, cool.
That was kind of fun in Tokyo and with HP. Yeah. But, you know, wasn't enough to keep the platform alive.
Who was in charge of marketing it once it launched? HP or us or both? Or?
Oh, it was HP.
HP?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
They didn't, yeah. No.
That marketing juggernaut, HP.
Well, they made a nice YouTube video.
Yeah, you did.
Well, and they were marketing to, you know, they're selling into the enterprise direct channel. So it wasn't the kind of thing you'd go.
Maybe this is like a word of warning for those of you out there building some consumer product, you know, and then when someone says, well, maybe we'll just focus on the enterprise. Could be a signal.
Yeah, that's not a good sign. Your boss walks into your office and say, have you ever heard of the enterprise market?
We're going to pivot to the enterprise.
We're going to pivot. If we can just get one sale for 10,000 units, like that's all we need, you know.
That's all we need. We're all in.
The last refuge of a scoundrel is the enterprise market, right?
There it is. Yes.
But yeah. So anyway, that was the HP Elite X3. A lot of fun. I think it was called the Millennium, or it was called the Falcon, I think was the code name. And they had these cool little stickers and stuff. Anyway,
oh man,
project. Hey, so why don't we bring Laura on here?
Yeah.
And let's, you know, dig deep with Laura
Give us
Butler.
the straight scoop of what was going on at that time.
Exactly. All right, here we go. Great. Well, thanks, Laura, for joining us. Wow, we are all the way in episode 9 here. It's hard to believe the journey. Although, hint, hint, we are not recording these in order. So it's not exactly.
I don't have to pretend that it's Christmas outside or anything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll put the snow in there.
Yeah.
But no, great. Thanks for joining us, Laura. And we're here, Rob and myself. And we're going to talk a little bit about this era of Windows Phone, kind of toward the end, or the end, as they would say. And it was really an interesting time because there was a real kind of convergence inside of Microsoft on a lot of platforms and things happening. And we're going to talk about that. And Laura, you're probably one of the best people to talk to about that because you had such a long career at Microsoft, working on so many products. And I don't want to take all 20 minutes talking about everything you've worked on at Microsoft, but why don't you give us a little context about kind of your history at Microsoft and how you got into like kind of the Windows Phone world?
Sure. And then how you and I ended up crossing paths, Pete.
Yes.
Okay, well, obviously, WTF stands for what are the facts? So this is going to be
what it means.
Completely factual, uncontroversial, history. Well, I'm a misfit who has leveraged my misfitness. So I'm a dropout from Harvard. Microsoft was my island of misfit toys back in 1989. I came out here as a summer intern computer programmer on what was going to be Word for Windows 1.0. And I was like, I've come to awe. Like, they're actually paying me, unlike my advisor at school, who like I could never find. And I was getting charged. I had to give blood. Fortunately, I'm B negative. So that was worth it. Give blood, take psych tests. Don't trust any psychology research that comes out of Harvard. It's the same hungry, and anemic students answering the questions. Anyway, and so I was like, this is amazing. I just get to fix bugs. And I'm like, it's in a conference room. Well, Word for Windows was one of those things that was going to ship any day now. And didn't. And there was a lot of skepticism about this thing called Windows because there was DOS and then there was going to be OS2 NT. And Windows was just this, kind of like the bodyguard, like the red shirt. And I ended up just finding and filing bugs. And then they're like, we might as well let the intern deal with this because that Windows thing's never going to go anywhere. So I ended up in the Windows team. So I joined Windows. Well, I was on Windows 3.1.1 and 3.1. I did prototyping of like the open file. Like, who knew when you're an intern, you're going to do something that trillions of people are going to touch. Exactly. And like an idiot, you put your email address in there, like your Zorro, and then 25 years later, the lawyers like go to subpoena, think not a smart thing to do. Anyway, so that was really cool. So Windows 95 was run by an incredible man by the name of Brad Silverberg.
Yeah, Brad.
And many folks who ended up on Windows Phone grew up and delivered Windows 95. Joe Belfiore, Jeff Bogdan, many, many, many more. And so that was really an underdog effort. And what was great about it is we kind of got to fly under the radar long enough that we could actually do good things. But Microsoft wasn't so big and so set. And our customers were looking for new technology. They weren't of the mindset of like, please don't give me another update. Like, the timing was right. And the whole company rallied around it. I mean, Office 95 at the same time.
Yeah, start me up.
Start me up. Oh, yeah. Anyway, and there was this real emphasis on we have to meet the developers where they are. Like, the developers are everything for Windows. App compatibility. We were switching from 16-bit to 32-bit and getting them to work side by side. Well, I mean, you don't have to understand computer programming to know that 32 bits is 16 bits more than 16 bits. And like getting it to work together has some problems, right?
That's a good, I think that's where we all learned the word thunk.
Thunk. Yes. Assembly thunks for send message. That things up a lot. But anyway, hey, the developers are everything and compatibility is everything. If we want people to upgrade to this, like, it cannot disrupt what they're doing, but it also has to be better. Like, what are the use cases? We dog fooded that thing. And so dog fooding is you're using what you're building for your customers. And Brad was adamant about this. I think end of 94. And by the way, I'm telling you all of this because it kind of sets the stage for some things in Windows Phone. Same people, similar environment from my point of view in some ways, and similar challenges. We were like, it's broken. We're losing our email. Now, when you're an engineer, you don't mind losing your email, but the PMs like minded losing their email. And Brad was like, how can we ship this thing if like it's not working? If you guys don't believe in it, like, we're done. So anyway, so it was an incredible moment. Now we think it was awesome. I can tell you that for 2 years and 11 months, it was a lot of not awesome, of like living at work and doing my laundry and like the sink. But we look at it differently from hindsight.
Right.
And then the internet happened and I kind of bounced around. I grew the company like quadrupled in size. Somehow I ended up as a product unit manager when I'm not a business person, and it wasn't really a product. Almost none of us have products in the sense of something that people choose to pay for independently. And in 2000, like the empire struck back. Like it caught up with my Princess Leia self. So I rage quit. 9 years later, I was part of a startup, and we had been talking to Joe Belfiore and some other folks that were on Zune and on Media Center. And that was evolving. And they're like, well, there's this Windows Phone thing. You should come join Windows Phone. And I think my first reaction was, yet another failed attempt at mobile by the same recycled parts that are like a Goodwill. Hey, it's a drive-by. You don't want to throw your boots in the trash, even though they're worn out. Like you'll drive by the Goodwill. You'll drop them outside the Windows Phone team or mobile or whatever it was. Right?
Right.
But the more I talked to them, I'm like, wait, these are the same people that worked on Windows 95. This is serious. And oh my God, it's a good vision. Someone finally gets that it's about freedom, right? And the whole UI design, Metro, was really about being able to be in the world and not be here, right? So there was a lot of UI design thought that went into that user interface. And we had to do the work on a very old chipset, which was reliable. It also meant we had to be very simple and very performant. So I was like, cool. So that's how I got into Windows Phone in 2009. And I think that scrappiness, that dog fooding, I mean, we lived on Windows. It was the best meeting device ever. You'd be in meetings. You'd be like, I know the bugs are piling in. And you'd have your phone underneath the cursor. You'd be like, okay, I'm getting work done. This is great.
Right. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So you really brought like kind of a really interesting history and perspective into the project. And, you know, at this point, if people are watching episode 9, they've probably watched the one with Joe Belfiore, which is a couple episodes before this. So it'll be interesting to see how those all line up. But that was a fascinating time period, right? And I think, you know, how did Windows Phone compare? You were mentioning like, did it kind of feel like have a Windows 95 feel to it? I mean, was that culturally kind of similar in terms of how because, you know, I guess one of the things at that point, and again, for people who are watching episode 9, we started with episode 1. I mean, we started with Windows CE and Windows Mobile. It was like this whole era of phone before Windows Phone. Right. So another aspect of Windows Phone was that it was a bit of a reboot from a previous business, right? So did you get that feel as well, or how did that factor into it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I'd say yes now. Well, so this was summer of 2009 when I came back to Microsoft to work on Windows Phone 7. And we wanted to do everything, but we had to be compatible with the BSP, the hardware platform, and you know, Qualcomm was not going to change anything just for us. Yeah, I mean, I think the sense of being underdogs, and I'm 5 feet tall. I'm always gonna be an underdog, so like be a great underdog, right? It was a lot of the same people. I think there was the same sense of purpose and the same leanness. I mean, we had to be lean. Yeah. I mean, the devices, I mean, we knew how many arithmetic, you know, units that we could use if we wanted to have any kind of
very resource constrained environment.
Resource constrained. And we couldn't change everything.
Windows. Right.
You know,
right. Yeah. I mean, there was there was also, you know, at that time there was, you know, although it was nascent, the smartphone ecosystem was getting established, and, you know, iPhone was introduced, Android was starting to ship. There had been probably 10 years worth of funky smartphones before that, quote unquote smartphones. So yeah, you had a certain, you know, you had freedom, but it was freedom inside of a fairly resource constrained box, right?
Right. And Microsoft is playing to its strengths. I mean, developer ecosystem, I mean, things like Office and communications, right? Those had to be first-class great citizens on the device. But like you said, constraints, because, you know, you can look at projects like NT, which of course now is wildly successful, but spent years, because once you think you can change everything and you change everything all at once, like the bugs, the problems, they multiply. It's not just linear, right? So we had this, you have the platform that you have, you have the platform that you have, but go crazy on the end user scenarios. And then Windows Phone 8 was really the user scenario. Okay, we've got a pretty decent UI. Now it's time to, revamp what's below the waterline.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a big change. I mean, you're right. Windows Phone 7 was still based on CE. Mango 7.5 was also CE.
Mm-hmm.
It was a modified version of CE that allowed larger apps to run in it, because I certainly remember the Windows Mobile days where you couldn't get more than like 32 meg of memory per app. And so that was big. But you're right. Going to 8, that was switching to the NT kernel on a phone. And I remember a lot of people scratched their head. It's like, oh my gosh, how are you going to squeeze Windows NT into a little phone? That must have been interesting.
Yes.
Just mentally.
You may have heard, so there's a thing called MinWin. It was really the shared common core between between Windows and Windows Phone. And remember, at that point, I mean, a lot of folks that had joined Windows Phone had come from Windows. So there was, healthy collaboration, cross-pollination. And Windows ecosystem, which Pete knows full well, is like incredibly strong and rich with IHVs and so on. But chipsets and the BSP platform, I mean, those are really complicated, right? And so we kind of leveraged each other that way. It was like the peanut butter and the chocolate. Like the Windows Phone folks had the partnerships with the like NVIDIA, like the GPUs, the Qualcomms, and obviously the phone manufacturers like Nokia. And Windows, of course, had sort of API level and interfaces for hardware that we know work, and like the kernel and stuff. So we really did lean on each other a lot. Like I owned multimedia and graphics, and really everything up below the shell level. So kind of the middle. I was the Jan Brady maybe of the Windows Phone 8 engineering org.
I love it.
And I mean, I would have my counterparts, and we'd have calls up with Nokia. It'd be like 11 at night. They trusted me to represent us, and I'd be like, okay, you're a point of contact on audio, for example, because especially on a phone where you have limited power, right? You're not plugged in most of the time. It makes a really big difference if you have things like low power audio, things that might not matter so much for a desktop or a laptop.
And Nokia they pushed the envelope on a lot of things on the phones, and there's a whole other episode with Tula. They're going to talk about Nokia, but we were talking before we started recording about favorite devices. And why don't you talk about your favorite device from that era?
Okay, there are two.
Okay,
the first one is the Lumia 1040, the beautiful, incredibly high resolution camera that was also a connectivity device.
Like back in the day, for people that know, everyone has their iPhone 15 Max with 19 different lenses on it. But most of the time, people had one little pinhole lens, and this thing was gigantic. It took almost the whole back.
Yeah, it was like the pop socket on this phone, and it was
it was like a pop socket
color. It's a beautiful yellow color. I changed my wardrobe for it. It was the first device I was part of from beginning to end. It was Windows Phone 8 GDR2 was the release that powered that thing. There were some software changes, some hardware changes, a bunch of stuff. And I love that device for many reasons. Not just because it looked great and it was iconic, because it was a phenomenal communication device. And by the way, I'm a terrible photographer. My sister laughs at me. So that's kind of why I owned like graphics and camera in Windows Phone 8 before I went over to what we called CXE, the customer. I would call it this Windows Phone fast ship team, but because we know if I could use the device, like I'm a kind of a cowboy, and the picture would capture like the funny moment of my cat doing something crazy, and it was in focus and it was level, like it was cool. So I was like the best test case for this thing. And I'm also a typer, and I love to travel, and I'd also own the keyboard and like auto correction in a previous gig. So the two of them together, I would travel. Like I think I went to Patagonia, and you have like 3 minutes of connectivity. You're standing on an iceberg, and I used this thing, and it was flawless. I was so proud of this device. I was happy it was yellow. I would show it off. I would just set it next to me, and people would be like, "What is that?" And I'd be like, "Oh, this little thing. Oh, this is a Windows Phone." So I mean, it was a great device. I was just me and my team were just an integral part of it. I would compete at the time. We were on the mobile operator team, I think.
Yep.
Loved it. Okay. And then the second device is a device that never ended up shipping. It's the fabled, rumored not to be confirmed or denied, McLaren, which was going to be the big form factor device, so like a phablet with hover 3-dimensional touch. So if you ever heard the phrase hover touch,
that's right.
Hover touch. With normal touch, it's just a contact. It's just contact point. With hover touch, you get 3-dimensional. You get vectors. And what's so great about that is as you get close to the screen, you can start to do things like maybe zoom up the key on the software keyboard, but you also get directional info. So if you think about thumb typing, right, especially when you're in portrait mode, like you're not really often hitting the key. You're hitting it from the side or you're hitting the key next to it. And a lot of just prediction knows if you type T then H, the next letter is probably an E, an I, or an R, right? So it tries to do its best. But when you have directional info, you can really correct for parallax. So you can get a much more accurate kind of interactive experience in addition to all these other cool things where you don't actually have to look at your phone and touch it. You can be walking and kind of get close. So it was also kind of carrying on that metro, living life in the moment.
Yes.
Mobile thing. But yeah, it got canceled, unfortunately.
I remember that. I remember testing or dog fooding that a little bit. And I probably had an old one in my desk drawer when I left Microsoft last year somewhere. But
I think it was 2220. I don't remember. 2320 was the code. The 1020 was the.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yep.
Sorry, code names.
That's okay.
Yeah, that was a wild one. That would have been quite interesting. We got that one out.
We had all these little software things like you could use it with remote desktop. I mean, it was we thought about what if we could attach it to a physical keyboard and you have that big screen. I mean, you could think of it as a really small iPad, right? Like the iPad Mini, and some of those form factors were pretty similar. But
the other thing that was interesting back then that maybe a lot of people don't realize was the shifting of in the Windows leadership. So like when Sinofsky left and all the musical chairs were going on, and the leadership of Windows Phone sort of became leadership for Windows. So the Windows Phone org kind of ate the Windows org to a certain extent. And so Terry and Joe and those folks like that. So kind of full circle for you going back to Windows, I guess. But that was kind of an interesting thing. And so like Windows 10 and Windows Phone 10 were sort of built in parallel. And a lot of what Windows 10 was about, leveraged a lot of what Windows Phone was about. And can you kind of talk about that a little bit, or what was your recollections of that era?
Sure. Okay. So I was, what do we call it? Like engineering director, I guess, in Windows Phone 8, which means I had dev managers who had dev leads. So that was multimedia, graphics camera, renderer, and so on. Okay. And then after Windows Phone 8 shipped, I wanted to follow along. So we went to this newly constituted team, I think called CXE, which was not just commercialization. It was really we're going to ship often. We're going to be the Windows Phone Agile team. And that's how we're going to grow. We were the growth team. That's really what we were. And I was the sort of director of engineering for that. And so we released every month. We had a schedule, bug fixes, features, new hardware, new cellular standards, all of that. Okay.
Right.
So that was really
fixes to pass Verizon.
Yes. Yeah. And like low power Wi-Fi, all of that stuff.
Yeah, all kinds of little goodies.
Telemexico. How we, could have been we were best buddies with Carlos Slim for a little bit. So that was in 2013. And towards the end of 2013, of course, what Pete's talking about is when Windows Phone and Windows became one org. And I think our leadership obviously felt very close to Windows Phone still, but it's just started to get very hard to keep attention on that. Meanwhile, what are we doing with Windows was taking up everybody's minds. And this is after Windows 8 and some of the things that just maybe were ahead of their time didn't land as well as they could have. And partly maybe a lot of folks don't realize we were both teams, Windows Phone 8 and Windows 8. We were on very hard schedules because of hardware. And not just that, like the holiday season. Anyone who's ever done anything for retail knows you have to have everything ready.
You have to hit the window.
First, and then there's ads and it goes on and on. But anyway, so that was just taking more and more attention. And meanwhile, if Windows isn't healthy, how good is something called Windows Phone going to be?
Exactly.
So really the decision sort of came to kind of wind down Windows Phone. And Pete, you were a part of, and I think Rob, you were part of that more than I was.
Bad times.
Bad times.
Yeah.
But we were talking about a lot of the things that were in Windows Phone. I mean, they live to this day, and they actually help Windows 10, right? I think one part, like this philosophy of we're shipping a service. You know, when you have a mobile device, like, you know, the cellular network is part of the service, and you got to ship often, and there's new devices, and you got to take care of your customers. It's not this one and done thing.
Right.
That really kind of carried over into Windows 10.
Yeah.
So some of the UI decisions, connectivity, this not mobile second. There's no way Windows on ARM could have ever happened if there hadn't been Windows phones. So, I mean, it was very tough, I think, both sides to be on Windows Phone, because you're like, oh, Windows is everything. Still, it's, you know, it still lives.
Yeah, it lives on in the soul of Windows Phone lives on in Windows 11, I guess, at this point. But it's interesting. You mentioned at the same time too, I mean, some of the market dynamics that were happening around the 2014, 2015 timeframe. At that point, you know, I mean, you got iPhone in the market for 6 or 7 years at that point. You know, Android was just everywhere. You know, we'll have a whole other episode about app ecosystem and getting app developers on the platform. It became harder and harder. Yeah. I remember one time we were in a leadership meeting and someone was complaining we didn't have a Starbucks app on Windows Phone. And someone said, well, we buy all this Starbucks coffee all the time. Like Microsoft buys so much. Can't we just tell them to write the app, you know, because we buy so much coffee? I was like, I wish it was that simple, you know, because the developers, you know, they just had other priorities with iOS and Android. So I think that was another part of it, was that there was just increasing negative pressure in the kind of consumer app market on the platform that was making it more difficult. And like you said, the priorities of making sure Windows 10 and Windows as a business was healthy was really the top priority as well. And so I think those things were sort of like some, you know, gravitational forces that were compressing the business. And I was actually part of a project called the HP Elite X3. We'll have to get Ben to find one of those. I think I sent him mine. But that was like the last Windows Phone. And that was built by HP as like an enterprise device, kind of phablet sized. It had the, you know, connect it to the screen and do like kind of PC like stuff. It had like, you know, lots of cool stuff in it. It was sold direct to enterprise. It was HP, you know, they had the whole channel thing, and they avoided some of the app issues because of, you know, making it more of an enterprise focused device. But even then, it's just, you know, the law of numbers and resources and things. It was just difficult to make it a standalone business at that point. And so that was, I think, the last one. There was another phone by Alcatel that was just right around that time, but I think HP probably crossed the finish line last. I don't know. I'm not sure. I have to check with them.
Yeah,
but,
and you can think of that as Microsoft trying to play to its strengths to people, to organizations or customers that don't want lots of random apps and games on a device as a kind of a companion and for their mobile workers. And actually, I don't know if you remember, Pete, I think it was WP8 GDR3, where we actually did kind of an embedded update for Brazil so they could put Windows Phone on these handhelds to go do census. And it's
That's right. I remember that.
Getting a bunch of strange requests like, hey, can you power an ATM? And we're like, what? Yeah, of course. Give me, you know, access to the cash. We can do anything. Because, you know, it was an interface that people understood and liked. There were some apps. Right. Maybe we were ahead of our time. You know, we were in just okay, now I'm going random, but I think we were in the worst quadrant. You know, sometimes your competitive advantage is you try the best of both. It's like, it's great, less filling or whatever. Yeah. And we were in the, hey, like the ecosystem APIs, do what you want part of Android, but trying to have the, you know, polish of Apple. And it was kind of playing not to any of our strength, or like we were kind of diluting our strengths, maybe.
I think it was tough because we had a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that identity crisis. Maybe it's too strong of a term, but it's like, well, is Microsoft trying to be Apple, or is Microsoft trying to be Android? And, you know, Windows Mobile way back when in the good old days with Windows CE was very Android-esque, right? It ran on TI chips, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it was like
I mean, ultimately, Android adopted the Windows Mobile everything.
They did.
Modified the heck out of it. Right, right. Yeah.
Except for the royalty. But yeah, it was like, yeah, go out and go prosper. And then I think when we shifted into Windows Phone, I think there was a lot of interest in what Apple had done and sort of curating that experience from metal to cloud and creating that beautiful experience. And we had a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
But we also had that ecosystem, and sort of there was that kind of weird tension. So it was like we sort of, depending on the day of the week and the executive you were talking to, we were either Apple or Android. And it's like, well, pick a lane, we got to do one or the other.
Yeah, and I think
and in fact,
it's like a shortcut for no compatibility problems, because you just keep everybody current on the latest thing and control it. Right. And in a weird way, we were kind of ahead of our time. I mean, I know the various incarnations of app platforms on Windows Phone had their issues, but I mean, the first time I ever heard of this notion of like a progressive web app, it was really at Microsoft, and because of course that was the only way we could compete. It's like, well, you can't get people to go build custom apps. Well, we can go do scrape it. We can go help people just wrap your web app,
your website,
easy, right? Yeah. And we just didn't have. We were in a place where we were losing browser strength.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I also think about the monetization model. Like Google had search, so they were willing to let things go. We had like per device licensing model, and maybe that also
Well, and Apple had the hardware. They had hardware revenue and margin, and Google had search revenue and margin, and we had. Microsoft had, OS licensing, which that was the kind of a tough one. It worked pretty well. And originally, and when we first started this series, talking to some of the origin story, I would say was like, well, Windows working pretty good. So let's do the same thing for
just
tiny things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it worked pretty well. But, you got to a certain asymptote where it's like, you can't really get over $1 billion in revenue because we're licensing, and the licensing pricing pressure was coming down because of, things like Android. And so if we had actually built, hardware earlier on, I think eventually Lumia became Microsoft Lumia phones or something. I think they were branded Microsoft.
Yeah.
Toward the end.
You could buy Microsoft at the Microsoft store.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it was and we didn't really have healthy cloud services, and particularly not for consumers. And by consumer, I mean an individual person who decides to sign up for the service. They might be doing it for business purposes. So
yeah. I mean, YouTube was at Google, and, eBay was eBay or whatever. Facebook was Facebook, and Microsoft in the consumer services space was not really happening.
Yeah.
Maybe Skype at the time was popular, but
early on.
That's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
That's a whole other set.
Oh my gosh. Good
the rise and fall of the Microsoft communication platform. But
yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So if you had to if kind of Thanos like snap your fingers and not kill everyone, but to like sort of just like change something in the history of this effort, what in your mind would be one of those things to do?
Oh man, well, hindsight is the best sight, so they say.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you what drives me crazy. What drives me crazy is sort of the talking about like the book was written, it was always foreordained that there was never a chance Windows, I think that's a cop-out. I think there were plenty of moments where if we'd stayed the course and understood the game we were playing, we could have gotten much farther along. There still might not be a Windows Phone, right? But if you start from that concept of it's about freedom, you are mobile. Mobile's about freedom, right? You're in the world. It fits with Microsoft's mission. There are other things in theory, like glasses and other peripherals that could have fit in that bucket, but still, that we could have gotten farther. I mean, I think the biggest thing, because I've been thinking about this a lot, so I'm at a startup now, is founders and operators are very different beasts. To start something up, you have to be an incredible optimist. You don't think about perfection. You do whatever it takes. You do it fast. You repeat. And then once it's successful, then you die. You either die of starvation or indigestion. I think that's from Bill Hewlett, right? You're in the dying of starvation, and then the second it works, you're now in digestion mode because now you can't scale this amazing thing that you've just done, right?
Right.
Windows Phone and mobile efforts were a founder problem. Microsoft's operator. And, it's like, okay, hey, we're used to getting the CEO of this company on the phone, and they will change the chipset. we had no position of strength, right? Not with the chips, not with the drivers. The patent situation is complicated. We didn't have an app
mobile operators.
And so we had no strength, but we acted like we did. And I don't think we intended to be arrogant, but I'm sure that is how it came across. We come to China and we're like, hey, we're here, guys. Why the hell are you making us fill out this paperwork for China Telecom certification? And like, because we're China and everybody does it. Like, are you guys morons? We're like, oh no, I'll just get Brad Smith to call up. It doesn't work like that. So if I could have changed one thing, it would have been when we had the Windows Phone growth team, that we did it sooner and we stuck with it longer, because it worked. Pete, when you and I worked together, I mean, we grew market share. We were agile. We were the number one device in Mexico for a bit, because Apple was royalty. Apple was like, oh, we're not going to do anything because you ask us. And we were like, we're the underdogs. Tell us what you need doing. We could have continued that. And obviously we were strong in Eastern Europe. We were strong in Scandinavia. I also understand that when you work at a Microsoft, if you're not strong in your backyard, right? If the schools aren't using Microsoft software, like it's right. So I wish that we had just realized that we were in founder mode sooner and optimized for it. Some of the rigorousness around operating system development and builds was fantastic. But at the end of the day, we need to have a Swiss train schedule. We need to ship early and often and predictably, and we need to meet the partners where they are, because they are the channel, right? They are the ones distributing this device, and we need to help them to help us. Yeah. And we don't have to we're not abasing ourselves, but recognizing that we were not in the position of strength. We needed to be quick, and that it worked, and we continue. I think we could have gotten farther. Yeah. But that's my 2 cents.
That is an interesting insight. I mean, I think that, there's definitely a lot of dynamics out there, and especially, like you said, outside the US. I mean, one of the things that Nokia brought into the partnership was all that brand equity outside the US as well. And
just think about South America. I mean, landlines, they were mobile instantly. They had no or Africa, no infrastructure to obliterate. Those are places Microsoft is strong. Right? Yeah. Where we could have gone. But that's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, interesting. And also, I think there's also that bias around your own backyard, right? It's like, well, if we're not doing well at Verizon, I guess we're not doing well. And it's like, well,
or I'm a person of a certain age, and I grew up with email, so text messaging. What's this thing, right?
Yeah,
right.
I think also it was a fast evolving space. I'd say Microsoft has obviously learned from that. Look at AI. And how fast that's moving. If we took a Windows Phone engineering approach to that, Microsoft would not be getting anywhere. It's just moving too fast. True. And it's even, so I think, it was a space that was evolving fast. Besides, speed was everything.
I remember in that time frame, even, seeing Windows Phone on TV shows. I mean, I know we did some marketing on that. And I'll see reruns of some of these shows.
Yeah, well, you have to talk to Ben. I mean, it's actually, I think we gave them such great licensing terms. It's amazing still. You're like, they're using a Lumia. What the
right. Yeah. I've seen them in TV shows. I've seen them in movies, wow, everybody's got a Windows Phone. How did that happen?
Wasn't by accident.
Yes. Absolutely.
Well, Laura, it's been great having you here and kind of talking about the innards and the engine room and all the pieces that were sort of behind the scenes. I think a lot of people, when they engage, one of the cool things about tech history is everyone has their own perspective. They were either part of the company that was building the tech, or they were a consumer of the tech. And, you're one of the few people that was sort of behind the scenes, seeing how these things were built over a long period of time. And so I think folks that are listening to this and maybe had a Windows Phone or liked Windows Phone or had a Windows Phone t-shirt or I don't know, whatever. Now they're like, oh, that's actually how things work. And sometimes at big companies, when there's innovation, in spite of how cool it is and how neat it is, sometimes there's a lot of externalities that affect how successful that product will be. And maybe that's a lesson for folks today that are trying to do entrepreneurial things at big companies or doing startups, right? Is that the externalities sometimes come into play, and you have to sort of figure out how to factor through those things. But really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, both of you. I mean, I guess I just want to close with it's probably the biggest heartbreak of my professional life. So many people, not just me, we put our blood, not just our blood and our soul into this thing. We loved it. We lived on it. We lived at work working on it. And that is so hard. And sometimes you just knowing when to stop